I need to admit something embarrassing before we get into this. 3 years ago, I bought a watch I could not afford, specifically so that I would look like the kind of person who could afford it. I told myself it was an investment piece. I told myself it would hold its value. What I actually told myself, underneath all of that, was when people see this on my wrist, they will assume things about me that aren't currently true. I wore it for about 4 months before the feeling wore off completely, and it sat in a drawer for 2 years after that. I eventually sold it for less than half of what I paid. I'm telling you this because I'm not approaching this list as someone who figured this out by watching other people make mistakes. I'm approaching it as someone who has personally made several of the purchases on it, and who has gone back afterward and tried to understand, honestly, what I actually thought I was buying. Because here's the pattern that becomes obvious once you start looking for it. There is a specific, repeatable list of purchases people make, not impulsive, not reckless, often carefully considered, that are not really purchases of a product. They're purchases of an impression. And the impression, it turns out, has a shockingly short shelf life. The research on this is consistent across multiple studies on what economists call status consumption. The emotional lift from a purchase made primarily to signal success peaks almost immediately and decays within weeks. The financial cost of that purchase, meanwhile, sticks around for years, sometimes decades if we're talking about a house. You're left holding a depreciating asset and a feeling that already left the building. That's the trade. Nobody describes it that way in the moment, which is exactly why it keeps happening. My name is Zayn, and I spend an unreasonable amount of time thinking about the gap between what people buy and what they actually wanted when they bought it. If you've ever felt that specific fading high after a big purchase, the one where the excitement is already gone before the thing has even fully arrived, make sure to hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up, because today we're going through the 10 purchases I see this happen with most often, why each one fails to deliver what it promises, and what the regret is actually trying to tell you. Let's get into it. Number 1. The car that's one tier above what you actually need. This is the purchase I opened with, and it's the most common one I hear about, because cars sit at this strange intersection of genuine necessity and pure status theater. Nobody regrets buying a car. People regret buying the trim level above the one they needed, the upgraded package, the bigger engine they'll never use, the brand that costs $8,000 more for functionally the same vehicle. Run the math on this honestly. An extra $250 a month financed over 6 years is $18,000, not for better transportation, for a badge. And the badge stops registering with anyone, including you, almost immediately. Within a year, the car is just your car again. You've stopped noticing it. The only thing that hasn't disappeared is the payment. Number 2, the logo, not the craftsmanship. There's a version of buying something expensive that makes sense, genuinely well-constructed goods built to outlast cheaper alternatives that you keep for 15 years. This is not that. This is paying a 4-figure premium specifically for a recognizable mark on a product that, with the logo removed, would sell for a fraction of the price. People consistently overestimate how much strangers notice these signals and consistently underestimate how fast their own excitement about owning one fades. Most people I've talked to describe the genuine thrill lasting somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks. After that, it's an object in a closet that cost 4 times what a comparable unbranded version would have. Number 3. The house that's bigger than your actual life. This is the most expensive item on the entire list, and the regret here arrives the slowest, usually somewhere around year 2 or 3 once the new house adrenaline is fully worn off and the real cost structure of the place has become impossible to ignore. A bigger house isn't just a bigger mortgage, it's bigger property tax, bigger utility bills, bigger maintenance costs, more furniture required to fill rooms you don't regularly use, and a monthly payment that quietly redefines what counts as a financial emergency in your life. Square footage you don't actively use is pure ongoing cost with zero return every single month for as long as you own it. Almost nobody runs that specific calculation before they buy. Almost everyone runs it eventually, after. Number 4, the vacation curated for the photos, not the experience. There's a reliable tell for this one. If you found yourself choosing a destination primarily by looking at what other people's trips there looked like online, rather than by what you'd actually want to spend your days doing, you're buying documentation, not an experience. The regret here is unusually sharp because it's retroactive. People don't just feel a flicker of disappointment during the trip, they feel something closer to embarrassment afterward, looking back and realizing how much of the actual time was spent organizing a version of the trip to show people, rather than living the trip itself. Number 5, the watch, the bag, or the accessory that exists purely as a wealth signal. I already told you about mine. Here's what's strange about this category specifically. The item's actual function is almost never the point. A $4,000 watch keeps time exactly as accurately as a $30 one. What's actually being purchased is the inference you're hoping a stranger makes about your financial position in the 3 seconds they glance at your wrist. And the flaw in this math is almost comedic once you see it. Genuinely wealthy people, statistically, tend to undersignal rather than oversignal. The loud version of wealth is disproportionately worn by people who are still trying to convince someone, often themselves, that they've arrived. Number 6, the home renovation done for guests, not for daily life. This one is sneaky because it disguises itself as a quality of life investment, but there's a specific version of renovation spending that's actually aimed almost entirely at the handful of times a year people will see your home. The renovation you do before hosting, the kitchen upgrade you keep mentally describing as for when people come over. The regret pattern here is quiet but consistent. Years later, people realize they spent tens of thousands of dollars optimizing a space for a handful of times people visit your home, audience that visits 4 times a year, while living in it, unobserved, the other 361 days, exactly as they did before. Number 7. The subscription or membership bought for the identity, not the use. This is smaller in dollar terms per item, but enormous in aggregate because it compounds quietly every month. The gym membership at the expensive boutique studio because of who else goes there. The country club membership for the version of yourself that golfs every weekend, who turns out to golf 4 times a year. The premium app subscription for the habit you're building, that you stop building by February. None of these purchases are irrational in isolation. The irrational part is that almost nobody audits the aggregate, and the aggregate across a handful of identity aspirational subscriptions frequently runs into hundreds of dollars a month for access that goes largely unused. Number 8, the engagement ring or wedding spend calibrated to an audience. I want to be careful here because this category carries real emotional weight, and I'm not suggesting the moment doesn't matter. But there's a specific, measurable version of this spending that's calibrated not to what the couple actually wants, but to what will read correctly to family, to a wedding party, to a social feed. Research on wedding spending has found somewhat famously an inverse relationship between wedding cost and marriage longevity in some studies, a correlation, not a clean causation, but a strikingly consistent one. The regret here tends to surface a year or 2 later in the form of debt that has nothing to do with the marriage itself and everything to do with a single day that was, in part, performed for other people. Number 9. The designer stroller, crib, or baby gear bought for other parents to see. This one is specific enough that I almost left it off until I realized how often it came up in conversations. New parents are an unusually status-vulnerable population, exhausted, anxious, suddenly surrounded by other parents constantly comparing notes, and baby gear has an entire premium tier that exists almost purely to signal that you're doing this parenting thing correctly, expensively, with taste. The actual functional difference between a $1,200 stroller and a $300 one is, by most honest accounts, fairly marginal. The signaling difference, in a playground full of other exhausted parents, is the entire point, and it fades exactly as fast as every other item on this list, while the bill does not. Number 10. The career wardrobe, bought for a job you don't actually have yet. This is the one I find most quietly tragic because it's so often aspirational rather than performative. People dressing for the job, the income, the version of themselves they're hoping to become before that version has actually arrived. The closet full of clothes for a lifestyle that's still theoretical, the expensive bag bought for meetings you don't yet attend. None of this comes from vanity exactly. It comes from a kind of premature identity investment, funding the appearance of a future self while the present self carries the financial weight of it right now in a life that hasn't caught up yet. So here's what I want you to take from all 10 of these, because I don't think the lesson is never buy anything nice. Every single item on this list shares the same hidden structure. The purchase is aimed at an audience, sometimes other people, sometimes a future version of yourself, sometimes nobody but the mirror, rather than at your actual present life. And audiences are expensive and exhausting to perform for indefinitely, because the moment you stop, the performance has to be replaced with another one, funded the same way, decaying the same way. The fix isn't austerity, it's a single question, applied honestly before any purchase in this category. Am I buying this for what it does, or for what I'm hoping it says? That question doesn't kill the purchase. Plenty of times, the honest answer is both, and I'm fine with that. But asking it out loud before the money leaves your account is the difference between a purchase you still feel good about in a year and one that's quietly sitting in a drawer, already sold for half of what you paid. If this video made you wince even once, recognizing something you've actually done, that's not an accident. That's the entire list working exactly as intended. Hit subscribe because we're going to keep pulling apart the financial decisions that look completely reasonable from the inside and turn out to be something else entirely once you actually look at them honestly. I'll see you in the next one.